getting all these to speak or to give interviews. And the questions that we're receiving, I just felt they were kind of off and they weren't really digging to the heart of the matter. And talked to some of my colleagues and said, you know, Brian, you should write something for the New England Journal Perspective or a JAMA Piece of My Mind or these other publications. And I thought to myself, well, that's well and good, but that is not going to reach the audience that needs to hear what I feel I need to say. Then it occurred to me, why not just write something for the local paper, the Dallas Morning News? And then I wrote my first piece, which was a full page spread in the Sunday paper, which got a lot of response because of the timing, because of the topic, and because of the location. And from that, I started thinking, well, yeah, I can actually have more influence by stepping outside of the normal walls of publication that I normally have been doing to try to influence public opinion. So if you're thinking about doing a op-ed, you're probably asking, like, where do you start? How do you begin? And I begin with just asking myself two questions. This is me, okay? I'm not a writing instructor. I don't have any degree in this, but when I'm about to write something, an op-ed, I ask myself two questions. What is my point? What is the point of this piece? Second question I ask is, why should I care? So for you, if you're writing, what's your point and why should I care? It's like, why should I care? Why should your intended audience care? If you can't answer those two questions, then you need to dig deeper into what you want to write. And to do that, just ask yourself a series of why questions. Why this topic? Why are you the one that should write it? And why are you writing it now? If you can answer those three questions, then you're kind of on your way to getting something out there, but really think about that before you start writing. There are many beautiful pieces out there that are eloquent, and you get to the end of them, and you're like, what was the point of all this? What am I supposed to take from this? What should I do? So answer that before you put your first word down on for your first words down in your word processor. Can't answer that? Toss that idea in the trash and move on. So let's start with just a sample format. This is not the only format. It is the format that kind of hit all the high points that are kind of expected from an editor that's looking at your opinion piece, but do not feel constrained by this. But whatever you write should have these elements within it. First, there should be the hook / lead. So the lead is whatever grabs the reader's attention, something that's just you read that first sentence and say, I need to read more. It's either some really outrageous statistic, tragic event, something that grabs their attention. And then the hook is what makes it timely. What is the news item that makes it timely now? So you don't want to write about something that's historic unless there's something about now that makes it more of a interesting piece. So make sure you have your hook somewhere in the piece, ideally within the first paragraph, best, I think, within the first sentence. You need to have a thesis at some point. So again, what is your point? What is the point of your piece? Without a thesis, then your op-ed will kind of fall flat. It will not be as effective. You can't influence people without having a point. That's just talk. That's just making noise. It's screaming into the wind. You must have a point. Then here comes the meat of it. Like, what is your argument? And as you make your argument, you make your first point, second point, third point. Maybe you have 4 or 5 points. Maybe you just have 2 points, but you must argue, have some points to support your thesis. And those points that evidence could be statistics. They could be personal experience. You could cite research studies. It could be your own opinion, but somehow you need to support your argument with something that can take you back to your thesis and give that some more weight. This is really important, I think, and you must acknowledge your critics. If your piece, the point of that is to influence public opinion, then you can expect that there are going to be people that do not agree with you, or else you probably would not be writing it. And you must acknowledge the counterpoint in your piece somehow. And by doing that, you must assume your critics, like give them the benefit that they are smart, that they're intelligent, that they are moral. Do not just dismiss them as not being worthy of your time. Show them respect in your piece. You'll have that much more impact with your point in your thesis. And last, you have to have a call to action. There must be something that you want the readers to do after they've read your piece. The call to action, it must be something concrete and something that they can actually do. If it's as simple as go vote during election day, you must do that. Or go get your COVID vaccine. Or you should think differently about this particular issue. Something that they can do when they're done reading this piece that is not an insurmountable task. So that is a sample format, not the only format, but those elements should be somewhere within your piece. Now, for the popular press, most opinion pieces are between 600 to 750 words. Wherever you submit will have their guidelines that you can check out online and stay within that limit. But also, as you're writing, just stay focused. Do not drift. It's not the time to go off on tangents. You have your point, stick to that. You want to take a detour, get off on one exit, get back on the main highway, stay focused on your point. If you begin to drift through your op-ed, people will drift away and not finish it. You'll not land the impact that you want to have. So keep it short, focused, and stay on point. So I'll stop there. Is there any questions so far about what we talked about? I guess I have to stop sharing my screen here. Any questions so far?
Brian, you'll probably get into this, but do you just write opinion pieces when there's an event or you're moved by something, or are you actively looking for magazines or papers to write pieces for? Are you kind of connected with those individuals, or how does that process work?
So I'll answer that in two ways, what I normally do and what is possible. So for me, I usually write something when I'm moved by some event that occurs. And generally I have a baseline anger. So I'm not sure that's a healthy way to live, but I generally do. And something will just irritate me, another police shooting or another mass shooting. And then I will just write a piece based on that event. And then I will find the outlet that I want to submit it to. So I'm usually responding in real time, which is kind of an important point for your op-eds to be timely. You have to be ready to write when it happens and submit. And then at that point, it's about it being done. Perfect is the enemy of good. You must submit and get it out there because you recognize that there'll be many other people writing about the same subject as you do after an important event. So that's how I generally function. However, other options. If you want to write, let's say Memorial Day is coming up soon. There's a Memorial Day, that's gonna be a holiday. You can tie your opinion piece into an upcoming event and plan ahead. So, if you're a military veteran or if you're a military brat, you can talk about something that you remember from your military times and plan for it weeks in advance and submit in preparation for Memorial Day. Same for July 4th. And any other holidays, so you can plan in advance for an opinion piece if you like. The way I generally work is in real time. Something happens, I crank something out within a half an hour, put it aside, edit it, submit, it's out the door.
There's a couple additional questions in the chat, I think. So the first is from Dr. Bowie. Are all op-eds persuasive?
Well, all effective op-eds are persuasive. I think the whole point of an op-ed is to influence, is to change opinion. And it's a good point. When you're writing, you want to decide, do you want to be right? Like, do you want to win the argument, or do you want to be effective? So your op-ed should be persuasive in a way. And if you're getting responses that are both in support of your thesis and against, I would call that an effective piece that has persuaded people to actually read it to the end, right? If they read it from beginning to end, then you have been persuasive. You may not have persuaded them to take on your point of view, but you at least got the conversation going.
And then Dr. Matthews asked, can you talk about the difference between an op-ed and a letter to the editor?
So yeah, and first is length. Letter to the editors are much shorter, usually about 100 to 250 words versus an op-ed, which is, like I said, between 600 to 750 words. The letters to the editors are usually something that's written to a publication in response to a news article that they published. So for example, if on the front page of the Chicago Tribune today, there is a piece about public schools opening up again, you can write a letter to the editor about that particular piece that was written, what you didn't like about it and what you did like about it. If you're going to do an op-ed, that's something you create de novo about an event or some sort of topic that is not in response to a specific news public piece in the publication. And in fact, the editors will, if you write an op-ed that is referencing one of their specific articles, then they will probably either reject it outright or truncate it down and make it an LTE for you. So an LTE is a response to a specific article, and an op-ed is something that's much bigger, that's meant to persuade the public or your intended audience. Much larger issue.
And is it true, are letters to the editor, they're often like readers of that magazine or newspaper, and then op-eds, they're often not connected generally, right? They're not on the editorial board, they're not, right? Is that right? Or
yeah, so the original op-ed is short for opposite the editorial page. So when the newspaper, there's an editorial board for the newspaper and they write their own editorials. And on the opposite page, there would be opinion pieces that are written by people that were not connected to the newspaper. Just the general public would submit opinion pieces. And that was on the page opposite the editorial page. I think the New York Times was probably the first that was doing this. I'm not sure about that, check my history, but now the New York Times has actually changed their term from op-ed to guest commentary because of the rise of digital media, all these online options for publishing. So the newspaper is kind of gone by the wayside, but the op-ed still exists, but on a different terms. But you don't have to be part of the newspaper to write the op-ed. You can write for the New York Times if you want, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Newsweek. But you probably have more success being a local expert, so within Chicago. And if you want to write an LTE, if you see an article that you didn't agree with or you do agree with, write a letter to the editor. There'll probably be 3 or 4 LTEs about that specific article in the publication. And you'll see this when you fly. You pull out the magazine on it, Delta, United, American Airlines in the front, they'll say, hey, I saw your article last month on so-and-so, I liked it, et cetera, et cetera. That is a version of a letter to the editor. In the front of Jax and JAMA, same sorts of things. These are all versions of LTEs.
okay, great. Maybe we'll take this one last question here, and then you can move on with the presentation. In thinking about why an audience should care, should your argument be general enough for the general readership to care, or is it still consistent with an op-ed to only be appealing to a small demographic? So in other words, just healthcare workers specifically as an audience?
I think it's perfectly fine to narrow your audience, your intended audience, because that will inform how you write the piece. If you try to shotgun it to everybody, you can't please everyone. Your writing will be skewed. So when I'm writing, I'm thinking of one person. I'm thinking I want to convince, if this one person reads this, I want to convince that individual to come to my side of this argument. So that's how I view it when I write it. And I expect that there'll be more people like that individual that may read this piece, but also consider that when you're speaking, that there are other people watching. Like we're talking right now, you and me, Dr. Dorsey, there's other folks that are listening to what's happening. Same thing with your op-eds. It gets published. You may have had an intended audience for your piece, but there may be other people that will come across it. They'll read the headline and read it. There'll be all these ancillary, unexpected listeners to your argument that you may be able to persuade. So yes, I would think about your intended audience, whether that be I'm writing to the CPS school board, or I'm writing to City Hall, or I'm trying to sway University of Chicago trauma team, or if you narrow that and write it to that audience, the editors are looking for a variety of voices and a variety of topics to publish. So don't try to figure out what they want published. Focus on your expertise and who you want to persuade.
I want to make sure you get through your slides, so maybe
Right.
we'll switch back over, but we'll take questions again.
All right, so I will use an example of one of mine. This was the last one I had published in the Chicago Tribune. It came out last September. This was shortly after the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha. So I'll give you a second to read this. And when you're reading it, see if you can pick out what the hook is and then what is the thesis. All right, so you got your hook and your thesis. So the hook is in red. So that was the news event that it was tied into. That's what made the piece timely when it was submitted. And the thesis, my point, the whole point of this piece was the last sentence. The police shootings are a version of gun violence, or a type of gun violence. So everything from this point on is about convincing you that this is a type of gun violence. Questions about the hook or thesis? I just keep on moving on. We'll break for questions later. All right. Talked about the hook and the thesis. Then I said we have to make your argument. You have to make your argument and defend it. So I'll give you a moment to read this. So I'm leading into my argument. Now I have to support that. Can't just toss it out there and not give it some support. So my first point, which was a separate paragraph. This paragraph only serves one purpose, and it has to be clear in there. So see if you can pick out what that purpose of this paragraph is. That's in red. Black people bear the greatest burden of police gun violence. And everything in blue is supporting that. That's evidence to support that. I'm putting in statistics. And every sentence there supports that point. If it didn't support the point, it got cut. It served no purpose except to lead back to that point. So I just cite statistics one after the other, string them together to show that there's plenty of evidence that Black people bear the greatest burden of gun violence. Second point, next in its own paragraph. What's the main point? What's the evidence supporting it? So I do it easy. The first sentence is like, this is my point, then I give the evidence. I do not deviate. I'm not trying to be fancy here. I'm not trying to win any awards. I'm trying to be effective, right? I'm trying to have impact. You want to be effective with your writing, make it easy for the readers to follow. So I made my point first, then gave more evidence to support that. My third point, which was another paragraph. Same drill. What's the point? What's the evidence? Well, I didn't color this one because I think it's obvious that the first line is the point and the rest of it is all the evidence. So I followed a cookie cutter approach to this, made a point, gave the evidence, made a point, gave the evidence, made a point, gave the evidence. If the sentences didn't support the main point, it got cut from the final piece. Did you notice anything that was missing from what you've read so far?
I was going to ask about, you said you could use facts or personal experiences in there. Do you feel like, is that what was missing maybe? Or, and then do you think one of those is more effective than the other?
So that's a good point. So when you're making support for your point, you can use statistics, you can use personal experience. What else could you use? Some other means of persuasion, expert opinions. This piece I just use all statistics. Sometimes I try to mix them up. One paragraph of stats, another paragraph of personal opinion, another paragraph of experience. I just try to feel, for me, I'm just talking about what I do, what works best for that piece. So that was not in this piece. It was missing, but not the answer I'm looking for. I'm asking you to figure out what I'm thinking. That's not fair. That's not fair. I know it's not fair, Dr. Dorsey.
I guess my question was about citations, and I don't know if that's what you were thinking.
No. Let me go back to sharing the screen here. So hook, thesis, argument, critics, call to action. So I never really did have a separate paragraph to acknowledge the critics. Many times you will see, if you're reading up op-eds, they'll go through all the argument, they'll have a last paragraph that'll be, but of course, so-and-so thinks X, or to be sure, we could consider Y. I didn't do that as a separate paragraph. My arguments, my points were all addressing my critics, because I know that there's gonna be people that say black on black crime, that black people are committing a lot of gun violence against each other. So my point was to show the evidence, but also at the same time counter the critics at the same time. So I rolled it into one single paragraph, actually 2 paragraphs. So these 2 paragraphs. So the point of that is, I gave you that sample outline. Don't feel constrained about it. If you get all those points somehow within your piece, then you've nailed it. And then you can actually, you've made your thesis, made your point, addressed your critics. And then the last thing to do is just give a call to action. I'm gonna break again, Dr. Dorsey, and look at these questions that were piling up.
Yeah, there's a couple. Let's see. So Dr. Prashant said, what factors do you consider when deciding whether to send something for the public that you know will be controversial among surgical or medical peers? These are good questions, making you think.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to when you want to persuade and change public opinion, you're really accepting that you're maybe stepping into something that could be divisive or controversial. Not always. Not all op-eds are about dealing with controversy, right? But if you operate in that space, which is kind of where I tend to operate, I've just accepted that if I write the piece, I'm going to make sure I always address the critics. And when I do that, I'm always going to treat their views with respect and assume that they are intelligent and that they are of high moral character. Even when I know that they may not be any of those things, that is how I'm going to approach it. I have to be in that mindset when I'm writing, or else you can actually lose your own supporters, right? If you dismiss your critics, you can actually lose your own supporters as well. So that is how I approach it. I think when it comes to controversy amongst our medical colleagues, especially in academia should be the perfect place to have these sorts of conversations that are controversial. If we amongst ourselves cannot push a needle on topics that are of social interest and concern, but also controversial, then we got to really think about what it means to be in academic medicine, to be an academic altogether, because we should be the ones pushing the needle on that. So my thought about that is to just, if you're doing it with integrity and consistency and to serve the greater good, then you should move forward with whatever you want to write, as long as you're being respectful of your audience.
Dr. Hampton asked, regarding topics which have been repeated, publicized without a resolution, how do you make your op-ed more impactful? How do you increase the social relevance without losing your conclusion or direction?
So a couple ways to for topics that recur is if you can throw in your own personal user expertise, your personal experience, new information, that can make it impactful. You can try another publication. There are so many places to publish now that you can find somewhere, find some audience that has not heard what you're talking about. You may think that because something is popular, everyone's heard of it. You'll be shocked that there is still someone that may not know what you're talking about. Secondly, I would just go through the Journal of Trauma for the past 20 years, and you'll see stuff from 2001 that's being still done now in a different way in 2021. So in academic medicine, we begin to recycle and improve and iterate and make things better and more relevant. The same thing can be done with opinion pieces that address long-standing social issues. There's never an end date. It's never over. We can continue to contribute to the knowledge, contribute to the conversation, and contribute to progress.
I think we've gotten through the chat questions. If you want to continue with your slides.
Wait, is it? All right, so this call to action. They're all these parts are important, but the call to action, at the end of your piece, there must be something for the reader to do. You must have something that you want them to do. And it must be something that's concrete and they can actually, and that's doable. If you're to say climb Mount Everest may not be doable for everybody, right? But to say, go watch a video on YouTube about climbing Mount Everest and how extraordinary that is, that's something that they can do. So give them something that they can do. And even as much as saying, hey, you really need to think differently about this issue. To just think differently is a call to action. It doesn't have to be something physical or something you can tangible that you can touch. Something like that is also a call to action. So for this, I just did 1, 2, 3. 3 things that we should do, and it all have to do with how we think about gun violence. Nothing for people to do, no voting, no marching, nothing like that, just how we think differently about gun violence. So broaden our definition of gun violence. Gun violence is a public health issue, and understand that, do not forget that when it comes to police gun violence, Black people are suffering the worst gun violence in this country. And it's about public health. And then, that was the conclusion as well. When you conclude, bring it back to your thesis. So my thesis is about police violence against Black Americans. The conclusion should tie back to that thesis somehow and just close the loop. It's like doing a root cause analysis. You're gonna need to close the loop. Like, what caused this problem in the first place? Close the loop so it doesn't happen again. You write your piece, close the loop on your thesis. So that's about the writing part of it. And I think just like getting started is the most difficult part for people that have not done this before. Once you start, you'll start seeing that there's options all around you all the time where you can use your expertise and your voice to sway public opinion. So the next steps after you've written the op-ed, obviously, it'd be you need to pitch it to someplace. So how to write the pitch would be your next step, which I did not put in this session out of respect for time. You want to, when you write your pitches, all the same 3 things. Why this topic? Why are you the one to write it? And why now? That's what the editor, when they get your pitch, they're gonna say, why now? There has to be a hook. Why this topic? It must be of something of relevance to the community. And why you? Why are you the one that should be writing this topic? Why should I put your piece in our paper, in our magazine, on our website? And where to submit? There are so many options nowadays. I'm not even gonna begin to try to list them. But you have your legacy media, locally the Tribune, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. If you go through those every day, you'll see that there is someone from UChicago writing some op-ed on some subject. At least every week I've seen something from UChicago. UChicago is very prolific when it comes to writing op-eds that are in the popular popular press. So that should give you inspiration to let you know that yes, you can do this as well. And last thing is will it get published? I think if you get through those steps, write it, pitch it, submit it, then yeah, it will get published, and it can get published somewhere. For the next session, we'll talk more about writing the pitch and submission. But for today, I just want to get focused on just the actual writing of the piece and how do you get that inspiration to write your op-ed. Here are some sources. I just list these two. There are a lot. Just Google how to write an op-ed, and you'll just get a plethora of really, really good sources. When I began writing op-eds, that's what I did. Google was my instructor that I just sat down and did it. But these are two sources I think that are a good place to start, but do not end here. There are many, and you should make yourself, you should avail yourself of that opportunity because it's free. I want to acknowledge a couple organizations. The OpEd Project, you may want to check this out. After I'd written about 15 op-eds, I thought, well, maybe I could learn something new, want to get better at it. And I took this seminar. It was an all-day thing, and got a few tips and I met some other people. But from that, I'm now what they call an op-ed ambassador. So I help them teach their workshops. So it just shows you can go from nothing to actually teaching other people something just because you actually go out and do it. So I don't get paid for that. It's an unpaid job. When I mention them, there's no financial conflicts, but it is a good organization to check out. They're committed to raising the voices of the unrecognized voices, women and racial and ethnic minorities. Doctors for America is a nonprofit that is students and doctors that are trying to put politics, patients over politics is their mantra. But I work with them as well for op-ed workshops, and some of the stuff that's in this presentation comes from what they've done as well. So I want to acknowledge that they've submitted some stuff to this. And last is David Kristinger, right here at U Chicago. He heads the writing course at Harris School, and award-winning author, public op-ed guru. You can just Google him and get a lot of resources from him and a lot of inspiration from him. So there's people right here on the campus that we can approach to get information. And he's also very approachable if you want to send him something for review. So I just want to acknowledge that this is not all me. It's not Dr. Williams, not Brian Williams. I had a lot of sources, a lot of help to get me where I am. And now I feel obligated to try to push you to that next level as well. So get out there and do it. So your call to action is to write a piece. When you do it, just be bold and own your voice. Remember, stay focused and have fun. I enjoy writing op-eds, despite some of the heavy themes in them. The writing process to me is fun, and seeing it published is also rewarding. It's like getting that NIH grant or getting published, you're getting a first author publication in the journal. It's that same sort of endorphin release when you get that. And when you get people responding to it, then you know you've made a difference in at least one person's life. And if you're worried about what people will think, just remember the world is not changed by the self-regarding, but by men and women prepared to make fools of themselves. So write, submit, and get it out there and change the world. And that's it. Spend the last bit of time answering any questions you may have.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Williams. I have a couple questions, but let me just make sure I'm not hogging the time. So I'll start with mine. Do you have any advice for, let's say you get an op-ed in somewhere, are there things we should be doing to like amplify the message? Do you recommend blasting on social media? Do you recommend getting the hospital to help in that process to get our words out? What recommendations do you have?
Certainly, if you on social media, put it out on social media. I read somewhere where if you're putting stuff out on social media, you think you're screaming when you're just a whisper. So put your own stuff out there, Facebook, retweet it, Instagram, whatever you're on, just go ahead and send it out yourself. And also ask your network if they will share it as well. My wife is my biggest, she's my biggest publicist because she shares my stuff everywhere. As far as the university, I'm not sure how they are about amplifying our own op-eds. I know that they do not put any constraints on that, which is another thing to think about is we don't want to embarrass our institutions, right? We're not out to embarrass our institutions by our thoughts, but they do give us a lot of free reign here at UChicago to share our opinions. They are very supportive of that, as long as we know we're not speaking on behalf of the university. That's not the case everywhere. You don't always have that degree of freedom when you're publishing your pieces, but I'm not sure if I publish a piece and send it to communication at UChicago that they would amplify that. I've never thought about that. I've never tried that, but that is definitely a good question, but certainly lean on your network to amplify your submissions.
Great. Any other questions from the audience?
So Dr. Bowie asked earlier about citations in the op-ed pieces, and that will, for the most part, they generally do not require any citations like you would for a journal publication. But it may be something like, I would say, you know, in a recent RAND Corporation study, they said blah, blah, blah. That would be your citation, just saying, you know, you referenced some sort of reputable source, and they may back check it on the end to ensure you're not making it up, or they may ask you to submit the source to them for review. But as far as being in your actual submission, not necessary.
I think that's all the questions. It's mostly people just saying that this was a great talk and super helpful. So if there's no other questions, I think we'll probably go ahead and give people 15 minutes back. Thanks so much, Dr. Williams. This was pretty awesome. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right. Bye.